She controlled empires. They called her untouchable. But when ruthless kidnappers forced her car off a mountain cliff in the dead of night, not even her billion-dollar security team could reach her in time until a single father with calloused hands, combat-trained reflexes, and a heart still bleeding from his own losses rappelled down that ravine and pulled her from the wreckage with seconds to spare. What happened next shattered both their worlds. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Camille Drovan's name appeared on 14 different magazine covers that month. Forbes called her the Titaness of technology. Time named her Innovator of the Year. Business Weekly declared her the woman who redefined success. At 34, she had built Nexus Dynamics from a garage startup into a global empire worth $47 billion, revolutionizing artificial intelligence and quantum computing in ways that made her competitors weep with envy. Standing in the glass-walled penthouse of the Nexus Tower in downtown Crescent Bay, Camille surveyed her kingdom. The city sprawled below like a circuit board, millions of lights pulsing with the rhythm of commerce and ambition. Her reflection in the floor-to-ceiling windows showed a woman who had conquered every challenge life had thrown at her, sharp cheekbones that could cut glass, steel gray eyes that missed nothing, and a presence that made boardrooms fall silent when she entered. The quarterly earnings call had ended 20 minutes ago. Another record-breaking performance. Another standing ovation from shareholders. Another vindication of every ruthless decision she had made to reach this summit of power. Her assistant Jerome stood near her mahogany desk, tablet in hand, rattling off tomorrow's schedule with military precision. The sole investors arrive at 8 a.m. sharp. The prototype demonstration is scheduled for 10:30. The merger documents need your signature by noon, and the press conference is at 3. His voice carried the breathless efficiency of someone accustomed to managing the impossible. Camille nodded without turning from the window. Cancel the sole breakfast. Move it to lunch. I want to review the prototype personally before anyone else sees it. But Ms. Drovan, the investors flew in specifically for... She turned, and Jerome's words died in his throat. Those gray eyes held the kind of authority that made grown men reconsider their life choices. The prototype represents 18 months of development and $200 million in investment. If it fails during the demonstration, we lose everything. I don't care. If they flew in from Mars, they wait. Jerome typed frantically on his tablet. Of course. I'll handle the rescheduling. Outside, rain began to streak the windows, creating liquid paths that distorted the city lights below. Camille watched the patterns form and dissolve, reminded briefly of tears she hadn't shed since she was 12 years old. Success, she had learned, required the amputation of weakness. Sentiment was a luxury she couldn't afford. Not when thousands of employees depended on her decisions. Not when shareholders expected miracles quarterly. Not when competitors circled like sharks, smelling blood in the water. Her phone buzzed against the desk. A text from David, her ex-fiancé, whom she had discarded 6 months ago when his career aspirations began interfering with her strategic planning. Saw you on the news tonight. You look tired. Are you taking care of yourself? She deleted the message without responding. David belonged to a version of herself that no longer existed. A woman who might have chosen love over leverage, partnership over dominance. That woman had been weak, vulnerable, prone to the kind of emotional decisions that destroyed empires. Camille had buried her so deep that sometimes she forgot she had ever existed. The intercom crackled. Ms. Drovan, your car is ready downstairs. Which route tonight, Jerome? I've instructed Patterson to take the scenic route through Blackstone Ridge, less traffic, and you mentioned wanting quiet time to review the Hong Kong proposals. Camille gathered her leather briefcase, stuffed with contracts that would reshape 3 industries, and eliminate 2,000 jobs. Progress demanded sacrifice, and she had never flinched from making the hard choices. That ruthlessness had carried her from a trailer park in Ohio to this glass tower where she commanded respect through fear and results. The elevator descended 60 floors in silence. Patterson, her driver of 4 years, waited beside the armored Mercedes, his face professionally neutral. He had learned not to attempt conversation during her evening commutes. These were sacred hours when she processed the day's victories and planned tomorrow's conquests. The car pulled into the night, leaving the city's glow behind as they climbed into the winding roads of Blackstone Ridge. Here, ancient pines pressed close to the asphalt, and the only lights came from their headlights cutting through the darkness. Camille opened her laptop, reviewing acquisition targets with the focus of a predator selecting prey. Thornfield Industries was hemorrhaging cash, making them ripe for a hostile takeover. Their biotech division alone was worth the purchase price, and she could strip the rest for parts. The CEO was a family friend of her late father, but sentiment had no place in business. He would understand eventually. They all did. Once they saw their severance packages, she was calculating liquidation values when Patterson's voice cracked through the intercom. "Ma'am, there's a vehicle following us. Has been since we left downtown." Camille glanced up from her laptop. In the side mirror, she could see headlights maintaining a steady distance behind them. "How long?" 20 minutes, maybe more. I've changed lanes twice. They match every move." A chill ran down her spine, but her voice remained steady. "Corporate espionage? Could be, or worse." Patterson's hands tightened on the wheel. "I'm going to radio security, have them meet us at the house." Before he could reach for the radio, the trailing vehicle accelerated, its high beams flooding their car with blinding light. Camille shielded her eyes as Patterson cursed it and pressed harder on the accelerator. The Mercedes surged forward, but the mountain road offered little room for evasive action. "Hold on," Patterson shouted. The pursuing vehicle struck their rear bumper with a metallic crash that sent the Mercedes careening toward the guardrail. Patterson fought to maintain control, but the next impact was harder, more deliberate. The car spun sideways, tires screaming against asphalt, before the third collision sent them smashing through the guardrail. Time dilated. Camille felt the sensation of weightlessness as the Mercedes tumbled into the ravine, glass exploding around her, her laptop and briefcase becoming projectiles in the confined space. Her last coherent thought, as darkness claimed her, was that she had built an empire, but never learned to build a life worth living. The car came to rest upside down against a cluster of boulders, steam rising from the crumpled hood, the smell of gasoline mixing with the mountain air. Somewhere in the distance, footsteps approached, and voices discussed her fate with the casual indifference of men accustomed to violence. Camille Drovane, the tightness of technology, hung unconscious from her seatbelt, blood trickling from a gash on her forehead. Her empire suddenly as fragile as the shattered glass surrounding her broken form. The impact had transformed the Mercedes from a symbol of success into a tomb of twisted metal and shattered dreams. Camille regained consciousness to the sound of her own ragged breathing and the steady drip of something warm trickling down her face. The world had turned upside down literally. She hung suspended by her seatbelt, laptop, and scattered papers, forming a debris field around her head. Her left shoulder screamed with pain, and something was wrong with her vision. Everything seemed fractured, like looking through a kaleidoscope. The acrid smell of gasoline grew stronger with each passing second, and she could hear the ominous hiss of escaping fuel mixing with the mountain air. "Patterson," she called weakly, her voice barely a whisper. The driver's compartment was silent, the security partition spider-webbed with cracks that caught the moonlight like a frozen explosion. Through the gaps, she could see his motionless form slumped over the deployed airbag. Panic began to claw at her chest, not the controlled anxiety of a difficult board meeting, but raw, primal terror. This wasn't something she could negotiate her way out of or solve with strategic thinking. For the first time in decades, Camille Drovain was completely powerless. Above her, she heard voices. Men talking in low, urgent tones. Target is secured. Vehicle went over just like you planned. Good. What's the status down there? Driver's unconscious, maybe dead. The woman's moving, but she's trapped. Car's leaking fuel pretty bad. Perfect. Make it look like an accident. Gas leak, spark, boom. Another tragic corporate executive lost to the dangers of mountain driving. The casual way they discussed her death sent ice through her veins. This wasn't random. Someone had orchestrated this, planned it, paid for it. In her ruthless climb to the top, she had made countless enemies, competitors she had crushed, companies she had gutted, executives she had destroyed without a second thought. Now one of them was collecting their revenge. How long do we give? A different voice asked. Fire department response time up here is 45 minutes minimum. We light it in 30, we're golden. No evidence, no witnesses, no problems. Problems. Their footsteps moved away from the edge of the ravine, leaving Camille alone with her racing heart and the growing smell of gasoline. She tried to reach the seatbelt release, but her left arm wouldn't respond properly. Something was definitely broken or dislocated. Her right hand fumbled with the mechanism, fingers slick with blood from the cut on her forehead. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Minutes crawled by like hours. Every sound made her freeze. Was that a spark? A flame? The end of everything she had built. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had spent her entire adult life accumulating power, influence, and wealth, only to discover that none of it could save her from a simple car crash orchestrated by someone with patience and a few $1,000 to spend on hired muscle. She thought about the last time she had called her sister Rebecca. 3 months ago? 4? Rebecca had been trying to reach her for weeks, leaving increasingly frustrated voicemails about their father's death anniversary, about family traditions Camille had abandoned in her pursuit of success. You've forgotten where you came from, Rebecca had said during their last conversation. You've forgotten who used to be. Maybe Rebecca was right. The woman trapped in this car bore little resemblance to the girl who had grown up in a double-wide trailer, who had shared dreams and secrets with her little sister, who had promised to make their father proud after he died in that factory accident. Somewhere along the way, in boardrooms and corner offices, she had traded her humanity for market share. The gasoline smell intensified. Camille could hear it now, the liquid spattering against rocks below the car, creating an invisible lake of potential destruction. Her right hand finally found the seatbelt release, but the mechanism was jammed, twisted by the impact. She pulled desperately, feeling the plastic edges cut into her fingers, but it wouldn't budge. Fear gave way to fury, not at her attackers, but at herself. She had survived a childhood of poverty, navigated the sexist wasteland of corporate America, and built a billion-dollar empire through sheer force of will. She would not die helpless, trapped like an animal while hired killers decided her fate. Using her functional right arm, she began searching the debris field around her head. Her briefcase had burst open, scattering contracts and financial reports. But there her Mont Blanc pen, the one she had used to sign her first major acquisition. The metal case was heavy, solid dot. She gripped the pen like a knife and began sawing at the seatbelt fabric. The threads were synthetic, designed to withstand tremendous force, but the sharp edge of the pen's clip found purchase. One fiber at a time, she worked at her restraint, sweat mixing with blood on her face despite the cool mountain air. Above, she heard an engine starting. Her captors were leaving, confident that physics and chemistry would finish what they had started. Soon, they would return to light their fire and watch her empire burn with her body. The seatbelt gave way suddenly, and Camille crashed into the car's roof, crying out as her damaged shoulder absorbed the impact. But she was free. Now came the harder part: escape from a vehicle that had become a fuel-soaked death trap. The passenger door was completely crushed, unusable. The rear window had blown out during the crash, leaving a jagged opening barely large enough for a person to squeeze through. Glass fragments caught the moonlight like deadly stars, promising to shred anyone desperate enough to attempt an exit. But desperation had become her closest companion. Camille Drovain, who had once commanded boardrooms with a glance, began crawling through her own broken dreams toward a hole in the darkness, every movement bringing fresh pain but carrying her closer to survival. Behind her, Patterson stirred. Slightly, a soft moan escaping his lips. He was alive, but unconscious and trapped in a compartment she couldn't reach. If she made it out, she would send help. If she didn't, they would die together in the flames her enemies had planned. The woman who had conquered every challenge now faced the ultimate test, not of intelligence or ruthlessness, but of simple human endurance. And for the first time in years, Camille wasn't sure she was strong enough to win. 15 miles away, in a modest cabin nestled among the towering pines of Northwood Valley, Travis Derrick sat at his kitchen table, staring at a stack of unpaid bills and wondering how he would explain to his daughter Sage why they might have to move again. The electric company's final notice glowed accusingly in the lamplight, demanding $347 he didn't have. Travis ran a calloused hand through his dark hair, feeling every one of his 36 years like a weight on his shoulders. The freelance security consulting work had dried up 2 months ago when his largest client decided to hire a full-service firm instead of a one-man operation working out of his home office. Now he was down to teaching self-defense classes at the community center for $12 an hour and hoping something better would come along before the landlord lost patience. The cabin was small but clean, filled with the kind of furniture that came from thrift stores and estate sales, but arranged with military precision. Everything had its place. Every surface gleamed despite the worn edges and faded fabrics. Old habits died hard, and Travis had learned long ago that discipline and order were the only things standing between stability and chaos. On the mantelpiece above, the wood stove sat a photograph of Travis in dress uniform, standing beside a woman with gentle eyes and a luminous smile. Sarah had been gone for 3 years now, taken by a cancer that had burned through her body with the same ruthless efficiency she had once brought to nursing. Even now, late at night when sleep wouldn't come, Travis found himself reaching across the bed for warmth that would never return. The floorboards creaked overhead as Sage padded around her room, probably working on another of her elaborate drawings. At 11, she had inherited her mother's artistic eye and her father's stubborn determination. She also had her mother's way of knowing when something was wrong, which made hiding their financial struggles increasingly difficult. Travis had met Sarah during his last deployment overseas, when he had been working private security for diplomatic missions. She had been part of a medical aid team, and he had been assigned to protect the compound where she worked. Their romance had bloomed in the strangest of places, between security briefings and emergency medical procedures, two people finding love in a world designed to destroy hope. When Sarah got pregnant, Travis had walked away from the high-paying but dangerous work without a second thought. They had moved to Northwood Valley because Sarah wanted Sage to grow up somewhere safe, somewhere green, somewhere that felt like the opposite of the desert compounds where they had met. For 8 beautiful years, it had worked. Travis had built a small but steady security consulting business. Sarah had worked at the local clinic, and Sage had grown up thinking the world was fundamentally good. Then cancer had shattered their peaceful existence like a grenade through a window. The medical bills alone had consumed their savings, and Sarah's death had left Travis emotionally hollow, going through the motions of parenting and working, but feeling like he was watching his life from a great distance. Tonight was worse than usual. The bills weren't just past due anymore. They were entering the realm of consequences. The electricity would be shut off first, then the water, then the eviction notice. He had been a tactical expert, trained to assess threats and develop solutions. Under pressure, but civilian poverty presented challenges that couldn't be solved with strategic thinking or decisive action. His phone buzzed against the wooden table. A text message from Mickey, his former partner from their security contracting days. Job opening in Atlanta. Corporate protection for tech executives. Good money, steady work. Interested? Travis stared at the message for a long time. Atlanta meant leaving Northwood Valley, leaving the cabin where Sarah's presence still lingered in every room. It meant uprooting Sage from the only home she remembered, pulling her away from friends and teachers and the grave where she left. Flowers every Sunday after church, but it also meant steady income, health insurance, and a future that didn't involve explaining to an 11-year-old why they had to live in their car. He was typing a response when he heard it, the distant sound of metal impacting metal, followed by the unmistakable crash of something heavy going through the guardrail on Blackstone Ridge Road. The sound carried clearly through the mountain air, bouncing off the canyon walls like an echo of disaster. Travis was on his feet before his conscious mind had processed what he had heard. His body moved with the automatic responses burned into him by years of training. Grabbed the flashlight, checked the medical kit, ensure his sidearm was loaded and accessible. Some skills never faded, even when you desperately wanted them to. "Sage," he called up the stairs. "I'll be back in a bit." "Stay inside, lock the door." "Is everything okay, Dad?" Her voice carried the worried undertone that had become too familiar. "Since Sarah's death, just checking on something. Do your homework." Homework. Travis grabbed his jacket and keys, the domestic concerns of bills and employment temporarily forgotten. Someone had gone over the edge on a mountain road known for its dangerous curves and poor visibility. They would need help, and help might be 45 minutes away if the emergency services were already busy elsewhere. His truck rumbled to life, the ancient Ford pickup that had seen him through a dozen different crises. As he navigated the winding road toward Blackstone Ridge, Travis reflected on the bitter irony of his situation. He was trained to protect people, had spent years keeping executives and diplomats alive in hostile environments, but he couldn't protect his own family from the grinding mundanity of financial ruin. Maybe that was about to change. Maybe tonight, his particular set of skills would matter again, would make a difference in someone's life, would remind him why he had chosen this path in the first place. The smell of gasoline reached him before he saw the broken guardrail, and Travis felt his training kick into high gear. This wasn't just an accident. This was a disaster waiting to become a tragedy. Someone down in that ravine was fighting for their life, and he was the only person in position to help. He parked the truck and grabbed his emergency kit, including the rappelling gear he kept for search and rescue volunteer work. The irony wasn't lost on him. Here he was, broke and desperate, about to risk his life for a stranger while his own daughter waited at home in a house they might lose next month. But as Travis approached the edge of the ravine and saw the overturned Mercedes leaking fuel onto the rocks below, he realized that some things mattered more than money. Some moments defined who you were, regardless of what you owned or how much was in your bank account. This was one of those moments. And for the first time in months, Travis Derrick felt like himself again. Travis secured the rappelling rope to his truck's trailer, hitched with the methodical precision of someone who had performed similar operations under enemy fire. The overturned Mercedes gleamed dully in the moonlight 60 feet below, its position against the boulder cluster, suggesting the occupants might have survived the initial impact. But the growing pool of gasoline spreading around the wreckage created a ticking clock that made every second precious. As he prepared to descend, Travis caught sight of something that made his blood run cold. Fresh tire tracks at the crash site, and scuff marks on the asphalt that suggested this had been no accident. Someone had forced this car off the road, and those someones might still be nearby. He had seen enough deliberate vehicle accidents during his security work to recognize the signs. This was an assassination attempt, planned and executed with professional precision. Whoever was trapped down there wasn't just a victim of bad weather or poor driving. They were a target. Travis clipped his harness to the rope and began his descent, every sense alert for signs of additional threats. The rock face was treacherous, loose shale shifting under his boots as he navigated toward the wreckage. Halfway down, he heard it, a woman's voice, weak but determined, calling for help. "Hold on," he called down. "I'm coming." The closer he got to the Mercedes, the stronger the gasoline fumes became. One spark, one hot surface, and the entire ravine would become a crematorium. Travis increased his pace, using controlled falls to cover distance quickly, while scanning for the safest approach to the vehicle. The rear window had been blown out during the crash, leaving a jagged opening barely wide enough for extraction. Through the gap, Travis could see a figure moving inside, alive, conscious, but clearly trapped. As his boots touched solid ground, he got his first clear look at the victim. Even upside down and covered in blood, Camille Drovain was unmistakable. Her face had been on enough magazine covers and news broadcasts that Travis recognized her instantly, though seeing her like this, vulnerable, terrified, human, struck him as profoundly wrong. This was a woman accustomed to commanding boardrooms, not hanging helpless from a seatbelt while gasoline pooled beneath her head, but recognition brought a flood of memories that Travis hadn't accessed in decades. Suddenly he wasn't looking at a powerful CEO, but at a 17-year-old girl with the same gray eyes and stubborn chin, sitting across from him in a government office in Columbus, Ohio, both of them aging out of the foster care system with nowhere to go. Her name had been Cami Chun then, not Camille Drovain. She had been bounced between 7 different foster homes in 4 years, just like Travis. They had both been products of a system designed to warehouse broken kids until they became someone else's problem. For 6 months, they had been placed with the same family, the Hendersons, who actually cared about their foster kids and tried to create something resembling stability. Those 6 months had been the closest thing to family Travis had known since his parents died in that house fire. When he was 8, Cami had been fierce even then, determined to escape the cycle of poverty and neglect that had defined their lives. She studied constantly, maintained perfect grades, and talked endlessly about her plans to build something important, something that would prove she mattered. Travis had fallen hard for her intelligence and ambition, though he had never found the courage to tell her. When they both turned 18 and aged out of the system, Cami had received a full scholarship to MIT, while Travis had enlisted in the Army. They had promised to stay in touch, had exchanged letters for a few months, but life had pulled them in different directions. He had followed her success from a distance over the years, reading about her achievements with a mixture of pride and wistfulness. Cami Chun had become Camille Drovain, exactly as she had always planned. The scared foster kid had transformed herself into one of the most powerful women in America. And now she was trapped in a car that could explode at any moment. Just another casualty of success making enemies. "Cami," he called softly as he approached the rear window. "It's Travis Drovain. I'm going to get you out of there." Her gray eyes focused on him with difficulty, blood from the head wound making her blink constantly. For a moment, he wasn't sure she recognized him. 20 years and hard living had changed them both considerably. "Travis?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "Travis from Henderson's house?" "That's right. Same Travis, older and grayer." He was already assessing the extraction route, calculating angles and leverage points. "Can you move your arms and legs?" "Left shoulder is wrong, but I can move." She tried to shift position and winced. "How did you find me?" "Heard the crash from my place. Came to help." Travis began clearing glass fragments from the window opening, creating a safer passage. We need to move fast. This whole area reeks of gasoline, and your friends who put you here might come back to finish the job." Camille's eyes widened. "You know this wasn't an accident? Tire tracks up top tell the story. Someone forced you off the road." Travis extended his hand through the window. "Can you grab my wrist? I'm going to pull you out backward. Try to protect that shoulder." The extraction was painstakingly slow. Every movement threatened to shift the car's precarious position against the boulders, and the gasoline fumes were becoming overwhelming. But Travis had performed similar rescues under combat conditions, and muscle memory guided his actions even. As his mind reeled from the impossible coincidence of finding his first love trapped in a death trap, when Camille was finally clear of the wreckage, Travis immediately began checking for additional injuries. Her left shoulder was definitely dislocated, and she likely had a concussion, but nothing appeared life-threatening if they could get her medical attention quickly. "We need to get you up to the road and away from this fuel spill," he said, helping her to her feet. "There's a man in the front seat, Patterson." "My driver." Camille swayed slightly but remained conscious. "Is he alive?" Travis had already assessed the driver's condition through the shattered partition. "Unconscious but breathing. I'll come back for him once you're secure." As they began the difficult climb toward the road, using Travis's rope and his knowledge of the rock face, Camille spoke quietly. "I never forgot you, you know, after Henderson's. I wanted to write, but life got complicated. I know. I followed your success in the news. You did exactly what you said you would do. Did I?" She paused, leaning against him for support. "Right now I can't remember why any of it seemed important." They had reached the halfway point when Travis heard it, vehicles approaching on the mountain road, engines running without headlights. The cleanup crew was returning to finish their work, and they would not be pleased to find their target missing. From the wreckage, Travis looked up at his truck, then down at the fuel-soaked crash site, then at the woman leaning against him, the foster kid who had become a billionaire, the girl who had once shared dreams of escape and transformation. "Kemi," he said quietly, "I think our past just caught up with both of us. And we're about to find out if either of us remembers how to survive." The sound of approaching vehicles without headlights sent Travis's training into overdrive. He had perhaps 90 seconds before the cleanup crew reached their position, not nearly enough time to extract Patterson and escape in his truck. Whoever had orchestrated this assassination would not hesitate to eliminate witnesses, especially witnesses with military training who could identify their methods. "Can you climb?" Travis asked Camille, his voice calm despite the urgency of their situation. She nodded, though her face was pale with pain and blood loss. "What are you thinking?" "We're not going up to the road. We're going deeper into the canyon, where my truck and your rescue will have to wait." Travis began guiding her along a narrow ledge that ran parallel to the crash site. "Those aren't rescue workers coming back. They're here to make sure this looks like an accident." The ledge was treacherous in daylight and potentially suicidal at night, but Travis had explored these mountains during search and rescue operations. A quarter-mile downstream, the canyon widened into a small valley with an abandoned ranger station where they could take shelter and assess their situation. Behind them, voices echoed off the canyon walls as the crew discovered the empty Mercedes and began searching for their missing target. Flashlight beams swept across the rock face, methodically probing every shadow and crevice. "Target's not in the vehicle," someone called out. "Blood trail leads toward the window." Someone pulled her out. "Find them. This was supposed to be clean, no complications." Travis pressed Camille against the rock face as a beam of light swept past their position, missing them by inches. Her breathing was labored, whether from exertion or her injuries he couldn't tell, but she hadn't complained or asked him to slow down. The determination that had carried her from foster care to corporate boardrooms was serving her well in this more primitive struggle for survival. They moved in silence for 20 minutes, Travis guiding their path by memory and moonlight while the search continued behind them. The voices grew fainter as they worked their way deeper into the canyon, following animal trails and maintenance paths that hadn't been used in years. The abandoned ranger station appeared ahead like a mirage. Small log building with boarded windows and a door hanging askew on rusted hinges. It had been condemned 5 years ago after budget cuts eliminated the position, but the structure was still sound enough to provide shelter. Travis helped Camille inside and immediately began assessing their tactical situation. The building offered good sight lines in 3 directions, multiple exit routes, and enough interior space to establish a defensive position if necessary. More importantly, it was invisible from the main road and unknown to anyone unfamiliar with the mountain's history. "Sit down before you fall down," Travis said, guiding Camille to an old bench near what had once been the ranger's desk. "Let me look at that shoulder." In the dim light filtering through cracks in the boarded windows, Travis examined her injuries with the methodical thoroughness of a combat medic. The shoulder was definitely dislocated, but the joint didn't appear to be fractured. The head wound was superficial despite the dramatic blood loss, and her pupils were responding normally to light. "Good news is you're not dying," he said. "Bad news is that shoulder needs to be reset, and it's going to hurt." Camille managed a weak smile. "I've sat through hostile board meetings with activist investors. I think I can handle some physical pain." That's the foster kid talking. Always too stubborn to admit when things hurt. Travis was already positioning himself to manipulate the joint back into its socket. On 3, 1, 2, he reset the shoulder on 2, while Camille was still braced for 3. She bit back a cry of pain but didn't flinch away from the necessary treatment. The joint went back into place with an audible pop, and her relief was immediate. "Better?" Travis asked. "Much." She flexed her fingers experimentally. "You learned that in the Army?" "Special Operations Medic Training. Turns out it's useful in civilian life too." Travis was fashioning a makeshift sling from his jacket, though I never expected to use it on someone from Henderson's house. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both processing the strange convergence of past and present that had brought them together in this abandoned building. Outside, the search had moved further down the canyon, the voices growing fainter as the cleanup crew expanded their pattern. "Tell me about your life," Camille said quietly. "After we lost touch." "The Army, obviously, but what else?" Travis hesitated. Opening up about personal matters had never come easily, even before Sarah's death made the subject painful. But something about the darkness and isolation, combined with Camille's obvious vulnerability, made honesty feel safer than usual. "Enlisted right after aging out. Served 8 years, got out when I met someone worth getting out for." His voice softened. "Sarah, she was a nurse with a medical aid organization. We met overseas during my last deployment. And we had a daughter. Together, Sage. She's 11 now, smart as hell, artistic like her mother." Travis's throat tightened. "Sarah died 3 years ago. Cancer, fast and brutal." Camille reached over and squeezed his uninjured hand. "I'm sorry, that's devastating." "Yeah." It was, still is most days. Travis looked out through the cracks in the boarded window. "I've been struggling since then. Single parenthood, financial problems, trying to figure out how to be enough for a kid who deserves better." "What kind of work do you do?" "Security. Consulting mostly. Corporate protection, threat assessment, that kind of thing. But it's feast or famine, and lately it's been all famine." He turned to study her face in the dim light. "What about you? I know the public success story, but what's the real version?" Camille was quiet for so long that Travis wondered if she had dozed off. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a weariness that had nothing to do with physical exhaustion. "I became exactly what I said I would become back at Henderson's. Built the empire, made the money, earned the respect. But somewhere along the way, I forgot why any of it mattered. She flexed her injured shoulder carefully. I haven't had a real conversation with another human being in months. No friends, no family that speaks to me, no one who sees me as anything other than a business opportunity or obstacle. That sounds lonely. It is. But I told myself loneliness was the price of success, that powerful people couldn't afford emotional attachments. She looked at him directly. Tonight, when I was trapped in that car, all I could think about was how I was going to die alone, and no one would actually grieve for me. They'd grieve for the company, the stock price, the deals that wouldn't get made, but not for me. Travis felt something shift in his chest, not attraction, exactly, but recognition. The scared 17-year-old girl was still there, buried under decades of corporate armor, but fundamentally unchanged. She had achieved everything she had dreamed of and discovered it wasn't enough to fill the empty spaces inside. "You're not alone now," he said simply. "No." She smiled, the first genuine expression he had seen from her since pulling her from the wreckage. "Travis Dayrick, my unlikely guardian angel, what are the odds?" "In my experience, the impossible happens more often than people expect, especially when you most need it to." Outside, the search had moved far enough away that they could no longer hear voices. Travis knew they would have a few hours before dawn brought renewed danger. Time to plan their next move and figure out how to get both of them safely off this mountain. But for now, in the darkness of an abandoned building, two people who had started life with nothing sat together and remembered what it felt like to not be alone in the world. And for the first time in years, neither of them felt like they were just surviving. They felt like they were living. The helicopter search patterns had moved closer, their rotors echoing off the canyon walls like mechanical thunder. But Travis could also hear ground vehicles moving systematically through the mountain roads. Too many vehicles, too well coordinated to be legitimate search and rescue. The people hunting Camille had brought serious resources to bear, which confirmed his assessment that this went far beyond corporate rivalry. "We need to reach my truck without being spotted by either group," Travis explained as they prepared to leave the ranger station. "Legitimate rescuers might mean well, but if your own board of directors is involved in this conspiracy, we can't trust official channels." Camille nodded, testing her range of motion with the injured shoulder. The makeshift sling Travis had fashioned was holding well, and her color had continued to improve throughout the morning. More importantly, the sharp intelligence that had built her empire was fully engaged now, analyzing their tactical situation with the same focus she had once applied to hostile takeovers. "The dead man switch I mentioned, I have 48 hours left before the automatic release triggers," she said. "That gives us time to gather additional evidence and choose our revelation strategy carefully. Or it gives them 48 hours to find us and stop the release permanently." True, but it also means they can't simply kill us and walk away anymore. They need to capture me alive long enough to access my security protocols. Camille's smile was predatory. "I may have accidentally given us the one thing we couldn't create ourselves: leverage." Travis felt a familiar surge of tactical anticipation, the mental state he had inhabited during high-stakes operations when failure meant death for people depending on him. But this felt different somehow, more personal. He wasn't just protecting a principle anymore. He was fighting alongside someone who understood both the stakes and the strategy required to win. They left the ranger station through a rear window, avoiding the main trail in favor of animal paths that zigzagged down toward the valley floor. Travis led, using skills learned in hostile terrain to navigate silently while Camille followed, with the careful grace of someone accustomed to high-pressure situations. Her corporate boardroom experience was translating surprisingly well to evading armed pursuit. The hike took 2 hours, moving slowly to avoid detection and accommodate Camille's injuries. They communicated through hand signals and whispered observations. developing the kind of operational rhythm that Travis had only experienced with military partners. Despite her CEO background, Camille adapted quickly to the requirements of their situation, never complaining about the pace or difficulty. "You're tougher than your press coverage suggests," Travis murmured during a rest stop. "Foster care teaches you things that Harvard Business School never could," Camille replied. "How to be invisible when you need to be, how to read people's intentions, how to survive when the system is designed to eliminate you. Is that what happened to Cami Chun? Did Camille Drovain eliminate her?" The question hung in the air between them as they resumed their descent. Camille was quiet for so long that Travis wondered if he had overstepped, pushed too hard into territory she wasn't ready to explore. But when she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of years of suppressed self-doubt. "I think so. Somewhere. Around my third promotion, I realized that being successful meant being someone else entirely. Harder, colder, more willing to sacrifice relationships for results." She paused to catch her breath. The girl who dreamed of changing the world became the woman who saw the world as something to be conquered. But you are changing the world. Nexus Dynamics has revolutionized artificial intelligence, created thousands of jobs, advanced human knowledge in ways that will matter for generations. Have I? Or have I just created more efficient ways for powerful people to accumulate power? Camille's voice carried genuine anguish. "When I discovered the weapons sales, my first instinct wasn't moral outrage. It was anger that someone had made strategic decisions without consulting me. I was upset about the process, not the consequences." Travis recognized the sound of someone conducting a fundamental audit of their own character, the kind of painful self-examination that only came after near-death experiences or profound loss. He had gone through something similar after Sarah's death, questioning every choice that had led to their financial struggles and his inability to save the woman he loved. "Maybe that's why you're here," he said carefully. "Maybe you needed to remember what it felt like to be powerless so you could understand what real power actually looks like, which is using what you have to protect people who can't protect themselves. Not because it advances your interests, but because it's right." Travis helped her navigate a particularly treacherous section of loose rock. "You're about to expose a conspiracy that could have killed hundreds or thousands of people. That's not conquest, that's heroism." They reached the valley floor as the sun climbed toward its zenith, the canyon walls providing blessed shade from what would otherwise be brutal heat. Travis's truck was another mile through dense forest, but the terrain was easier now, allowing them to move faster while remaining hidden from aerial observation. "Tell me about Sage," Camille said as they walked. "What's she like?" Travis felt the familiar mix of pride and worry that always accompanied thoughts of his daughter. Brilliant, stubborn, artistic. She draws constantly, not just pictures, but entire worlds with their own characters and stories. Sarah used to say Sage had inherited her mother's creativity and her father's determination to fix everything. "Does she know what you did before? The military work? The security consulting?" "Some of it. She knows Daddy helps keep people safe, but I've tried to shield her from the more dangerous aspects." Travis's voice grew thoughtful. "Since Sarah died, I've been so focused on providing financial security that I may have lost sight of what she actually needs from me, which is to see her father as someone worth admiring, not just someone who worries about electric bills and grocery money." The admission came easier than Travis had expected. "She needs to know that the skills I learned, the experiences that shaped me, they matter for reasons beyond paying rent." Camille stopped walking and turned to face him. "Travis, you rappelled down a cliff face to pull a stranger from a burning car, then spent the night protecting her from professional killers. If that's not worth admiring, I don't know what is." But she doesn't know about any of that. From her perspective, I'm just Dad who's been struggling to keep us afloat since Mom died. Then maybe it's time to let her see who you really are. Not Just the provider, but the protector. Not just the single father, but the hero. They reached the truck as afternoon shadows began lengthening across the forest floor. Travis had hidden the vehicle well, but signs of recent activity around the area suggested that search teams had passed through. Fortunately, the Ford remained undiscovered, and more importantly, UNCOMPROMICD. Thus Travis started the engine. Camille placed her uninjured hand on his arm. Before we drive back into danger, I need you to know something. Last night, when you found me in that car, you didn't just save my life, you saved me. The real me, the person I thought I had lost forever. Kami, let me finish. I don't know what happens next, whether we survive the next 48 hours or whether we can actually bring down the people responsible. But I know that finding you again, remembering who I used to be, it's given me something I haven't felt in 20 years. What's that? Hope. Not hope for success or profit or market dominance, but hope that I might still become the person I dreamed of being when we were 17. Her gray eyes held his with startling intensity. Whatever happens, I want you to know that you've already changed my life in ways that matter more than any corporate achievement. Travis felt something fundamental shift in his chest, a recognition that went beyond gratitude or shared danger. This wasn't just about protecting the client anymore, or even helping an old friend. This was about two people who had started with nothing, lost themselves in the pursuit of different kinds of success, and found each other again at a moment when both of them desperately needed to remember who they really were. Then let's make sure we both survive to see who we become next, Travis said, putting the truck in gear. As they drove back towards civilization and the confrontation that awaited them, neither Travis nor Camille spoke about the growing connection between them. But both understood that they were no longer just running from danger. They were running toward a future that neither of them had imagined possible when the day began. The secure location Travis chose was a small diner 40 miles from the crash site, the kind of place where truckers and locals gathered for coffee that could strip paint and conversations that minded their own business. The parking lot was full enough to provide anonymity, but not so crowded as to make them memorable. Most importantly, it offered multiple exit routes and clear sight lines in all directions. Camille had spent the drive using Travis's phone to access her encrypted servers, downloading evidence files and coordinating with the few people in her organization she still trusted. The scope of the conspiracy was even worse than she had initially realized. The weapons sales were just one part of a systematic plan to transform Nexus Dynamics into a tool for authoritarian regimes worldwide. Jerome knew, she said quietly, as they sat in a corner booth, untouched coffee growing cold in front of them. My assistant, the man who's been managing my schedule for 3 years. He was feeding information about my movements to the board members orchestrating this. That's how they knew you'd be on Blackstone Ridge last night, Travis observed. Inside information about your route and timing. Everything I've built, everyone I trusted, it was all compromised from the inside. Camille's voice carried the hollow sound of someone processing fundamental betrayal. They were planning to eliminate me and install a new CEO who would play along with their agenda. Travis studied her face, noting the way she was processing this revelation. The anger was there, but underneath it was something that looked almost like relief, as if discovering the extent of the conspiracy had somehow simplified her choices. What's your next move? He asked, before Camille could answer, both their phones buzzed simultaneously. Travis glanced at his screen and felt his blood run cold. A text from an unknown number, but the message made the sender's identity unmistakable. We have Patterson. We have your daughter. You have 1 hour to deliver Camille Drovain to Thornton Industrial Park, Warehouse 7. Come alone, or they both die. Attached was a photograph that made Travis's vision blur with Rage Sage, tied to a chair in what looked like a storage room, her eyes wide with fear but still defiant. Beside her was Patterson, Camille's driver, bloody but conscious. They have Sage, Travis said, his voice deadly calm. Camille looked at the photo and immediately began typing on her phone. I can end this right now. Transfer the encryption keys. Cancel the dead man switch. Give them everything they want in exchange for your daughter's safety. No, Travis's response was immediate and absolute. The moment you give them access to your security protocols, they kill all three of us and bury the evidence. We know too much and they can't risk exposure. Then what do you propose? Let them. Hurt an innocent girl to protect information that might save lives we'll never meet? Travis felt the weight of impossible choices settling on his shoulders. This was the moment every protective father dreaded, when your personal obligations collided directly with your moral principles, when doing the right thing meant risking everything you loved most. But as he stared at the photograph of his terrified daughter, Travis realized something that changed everything. Sage wasn't just a victim in this scenario, she was a witness to her father's character. Whatever happened in the next few hours would define who Travis Derrick was in his daughter's eyes for the rest of her life. We don't trade, he said finally. We win. We save Sage and Patterson. We expose the conspiracy, and we make sure the people responsible pay for what they've done. That's impossible. We're two people against a well-funded conspiracy with professional resources and inside information. No, we're not. Travis pulled out his phone and began scrolling through his contact list. We're two people with very particular skills, inside knowledge of their operations, and 43 minutes to execute the most important mission of our lives. He found the number he was looking for and pressed call. After 3 rings, a familiar voice answered. Mickey here. Mickey, it's Travis. I need a favor, a big one. Jesus, Travis, where have you been? Every news station in the country is running stories about Camille Dravain's disappearance. The FBI's involved, international task forces, the works. I know where she is, but that's not why I'm calling. Travis looked directly at Camille. I need tactical support for a hostage rescue operation. High stakes, professional opposition, personal involvement. Are you out of your mind? You're not active military anymore, and I'm not running a private army for hire. They have my daughter, Mickey. The line went silent for a long moment. Mickey Torres had served with Travis in 3 separate deployments, had been best man at his wedding to Sarah, and was one of only 5 people who truly understood what Sage meant to Travis's survival after his wife's death. Where and when? Mickey asked. While Travis coordinated with his former partner, Camille was conducting her own parallel operation. She had activated a legal protocol she had established years earlier, but never expected to use a complete transfer of corporate authority to her sister Rebecca in the event of her death or incapacitation. What are you doing? Travis asked when she finished her calls. Giving up everything I spent 20 years building, Camille said calmly. As of 10 minutes ago, Rebecca Chun is the acting CEO of Nexus Dynamics, with full authority to investigate and prosecute corporate malfeasance. The evidence files have been transferred to her control, along with instructions to release everything if we don't check in every 6 hours. Travis stared at her. You're walking away from a $47 billion empire. I'm choosing what matters over what I thought I wanted. Camille's voice was steady, but Travis could see the magnitude of the decision in her eyes. The conspiracy continues with or without me, unless someone with clean hands takes control. Rebecca has clean hands. And what about you? What do you do after this is over? Camille looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. I figure out who Camille Chun becomes when she doesn't have to pretend to be Camille Dravain anymore. Travis felt something shift in his chest, not attraction exactly, but recognition of a depth of character he had only suspected existed beneath her corporate exterior. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about 2 people choosing to become the versions of themselves they could actually live with. 37 minutes, he said, checking his watch. Enough time? Travis thought about the warehouse. District layout, the tactical challenges of a hostage rescue with limited resources, and the professional killers they would be facing. By any reasonable assessment, their chances were minimal. But looking at Camille, really looking at the determined set of her jaw, the intelligent fire in her gray eyes, the way she had just sacrificed everything for the principle of doing what was right, Travis realized that reasonable assessments didn't apply to unreasonable people. "Enough time to find out who we really are," he said as they left the diner and drove toward what might be the last hour of their lives. Both Travis and Camille understood that they had already made the choice that mattered most. Not between safety and danger, not between success and failure, but between the people they had been and the people they were capable of becoming. The rest was just logistics. Thornton Industrial Park sprawled across 40 acres of rusted dreams and abandoned ambitions. A graveyard of manufacturing that had once employed half the county before global economics and automation rendered it obsolete. Warehouse 7 sat at the far end of the complex, isolated from the main road and surrounded by enough derelict buildings to muffle screams or gunfire. Travis crouched behind a concrete loading dock, studying the target through military-grade binoculars, while Mickey Torres and 2 other members of their hastily assembled team took positions around the perimeter. The warehouse showed signs of recent activity, fresh tire tracks in the gravel, lights burning in windows that should have been dark, and the unmistakable silhouettes of armed sentries moving past the glass. "Count?" Mickey's voice crackled through the tactical radio. "6 visible, probably twice that inside," Travis replied. "Professional setup, overlapping fields of fire, multiple exit routes. These aren't corporate security guards playing soldier." Camille lay beside him, her injured arm secured, but her uninjured hand steady on a pair of binoculars. She had insisted on being part of the assault team despite having no combat training, and Travis had reluctantly agreed after she pointed out that she was the only person who could positively identify all the conspirators inside. "Thermal imaging shows 2 heat signatures in the northeast corner," she reported. "Smaller one matches Sage's size profile." Travis felt his heart clench at the clinical description of his daughter as a heat signature, but he forced the emotion down. Sage needed her father to be a tactical operator right now, not a panicked parent. There would be time for feelings after she was safe. "Mickey, what's your assessment of the rear approach?" "Clean for 30 meters, then we're in the kill zone. But I've got something interesting on the south side. Looks like they've got a mobile command center parked behind building 4. Fancy equipment, multiple antennas, the works." Travis processed this information, his mind automatically calculating angles of approach and probability matrices. But underneath the tactical planning, a darker recognition was forming. This wasn't just a hostage exchange gone wrong. This was a military-grade operation designed to eliminate witnesses and bury evidence permanently. "They never intended to honor any deal," he said quietly to Camille. "This was always going to end with all of us dead." "I know." Her voice was steady, but Travis could see the tension in her jaw. "That's why we have to win completely. No half measures, no negotiated settlements." The radio crackled again. "Travis, we've got movement." 2 vehicles approaching from the main road, moving fast. Through the binoculars, Travis watched a pair of black SUVs speed toward the warehouse complex. His blood ran cold when he recognized one of the passengers stepping out, Jerome, Camille's assistant, followed by 2 men in expensive suits who moved with the fluid precision of former Special Forces operators. "The board members," Camille whispered. "They're here to witness my execution personally." Travis keyed his radio. "All teams, we are weapons hot. These people are not planning to let anyone walk away from this." The next phase of the operation unfolded with the brutal efficiency that Travis remembered from his military days, but with a desperation that was entirely new. This wasn't about mission objectives or strategic goals. This was about saving the 2 people who mattered most to him in the world. Mickey's team created a diversionary explosion on the west side of the complex, drawing the majority of the guards away from the warehouse while Travis and Camille approached from the east. They moved in tactical formation, using cover and concealment techniques that Travis had learned in hostile territory, modified for an environment where failure meant losing his daughter forever. The warehouse's loading bay was secured with a simple electronic lock that Camille bypassed using override codes she had memorized from Nexus Dynamics security protocols. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. Her corporate knowledge was now being used to infiltrate a conspiracy that had grown out of her own company. Inside, the warehouse was a maze of shipping containers and industrial equipment, perfect for concealment, but terrible for maintaining situational awareness. Travis led with his sidearm drawn, every sense hyper-tuned for threats, while Camille followed with her good hand gripping a tactical flashlight that could double as a weapon if necessary. They found Patterson first, tied to a chair in a makeshift interrogation area near the center of the building. The driver was conscious but badly beaten, his face swollen and bloodied from professional questioning. When he saw them approaching, relief flooded his features. They wanted to know about her backup protocols, Patterson whispered as Travis cut his restraints. I didn't tell them anything, but they know about the dead man switch. Where's Sage? Travis asked. Patterson nodded toward a shipping container that had been modified into a temporary holding cell. Last container on the left. She's alive, unharmed, but scared. Travis felt something break open in his chest when he saw his daughter through the container's small window. Sage was tied to a chair just like in the photograph, but her eyes held the same fierce intelligence he recognized from her mother. She wasn't broken, she was planning. The lock on the container was more sophisticated than the loading bay, requiring both an electronic key and a manual combination. While Travis worked on the mechanical components, Camille used her phone to hack into the electronic system, her fingers flying across the screen with the focused intensity she had once brought to corporate takeovers. Got it, she whispered. The door swung open, and Sage looked up at her father with an expression that nearly destroyed his tactical composure. She didn't cry or call out, she just smiled, the radiant expression of a girl who had never doubted that her father would find her. Hi, Dad, she said quietly. I knew you'd come. Travis was cutting her restraints when the lights came on throughout the warehouse, and Jerome's amplified voice echoed from hidden speakers. Very impressive, Mr. Derrick, but I'm afraid this is where your rescue operation ends. Armed figures emerged from concealment positions throughout the warehouse, at least 8 professional operators with military-grade equipment, positioned to create overlapping fields of fire that made escape impossible. Travis immediately positioned himself between the threats and his daughter, while Camille moved to shield Patterson. Jerome appeared at the top of a metal staircase, flanked by the 2 board members Travis had seen arriving. All 3 men looked calm, confident, like executives conducting a routine business meeting, rather than orchestrating multiple murders. Miss Drovane, Jerome called down. You've caused us considerable inconvenience. But I want you to know there are no hard feelings. This is simply business. Business? Camille's voice carried across the warehouse with corporate boardroom authority. You call selling weapons to authoritarian regimes business? You call murdering American citizens business? I call it evolution. Nexus Dynamics was always destined to serve larger purposes than your sentimental attachment to outdated ethical constraints. Jerome descended the stairs slowly, savoring his moment of triumph. Your father would be disappointed to see how naive his daughter became. Travis saw Camille flinch at the mention of her father, and something dangerous shifted in her expression. The scared foster kid who had worked so hard to make her dead father proud was being replaced by something harder, more focused. My father taught me that power without principle is just organized crime, she said. But he also taught me something else, which is that sometimes you have to fight for what matters, even when the odds are impossible. Camille looked directly at Travis. And in her gray eyes he saw a decision that made his tactical training scream warnings. She was about to do something heroic and probably suicidal, and there wasn't time to stop her. "Travis," she said quietly, "when I activate my phone's emergency beacon, you'll have exactly 30 seconds before every law enforcement agency in 3 states converges on this location. Use them wisely." Kami don't. But she was already moving, stepping into the open where the armed operatives could see her clearly. "Jerome, you want access to my security protocols? You want to stop the dead man switch before it destroys your entire operation? Ms. Drovane, don't do anything foolish. I'll make you a deal. Full access to everything you need in exchange for safe passage for Travis and his daughter. They're not part of this." Travis realized what she was doing, creating a tactical diversion that would draw attention away from Sage while positioning herself as the primary target. It was strategically sound and emotionally devastating, the sacrifice of someone who had finally remembered what love actually meant. "Kami, no." Travis's voice carried 20 years of regret and recognition. "We do this together, or not at all. You have a daughter who needs her father. I have a legacy that needs protecting." Camille's voice was steady, but tears were streaming down her face. "I spent my whole life building the wrong empire. Let me spend my last few minutes building the right one." What happened next unfolded in the strange temporal distortion that Travis remembered from combat seconds stretching into minutes. Every detail crystal clear while chaos erupted around them. Camille activated her emergency beacon, and within moments every phone in the warehouse was buzzing with proximity alerts as law enforcement GPS systems locked onto their location. The armed operatives immediately began repositioning, trying to establish new defensive positions while Jerome screamed orders about containing the situation. But Travis wasn't waiting for official rescue. Using the distraction Camille had created, he grabbed Sage and Patterson and began moving toward the loading bay, laying down covering fire while Mickey's team provided external support through windows they had positioned themselves near. Firefight was brief but intense. Professional operators trading shots with the methodical precision of people who understood that survival depended on tactics rather than heroics. Travis found himself fighting not just for escape, but for the chance to save the woman who had just sacrificed everything to protect his daughter. When the shooting stopped, Jerome lay dead near the metal staircase, taken down by one of Mickey's precision shots through the warehouse windows. The 2 board members had surrendered immediately when they realized their hired security couldn't protect them from federal charges, and the remaining operatives had been overwhelmed by the arriving SWAT teams. But Camille had taken a bullet in the chest while providing cover for Travis's escape, and she lay against a shipping container with blood spreading across her shirt and her breathing becoming increasingly labored. Travis knelt beside her, Sage's small hand clutched in his, as his daughter stared at the woman who had saved their lives. "Is she going to be okay?" Sage asked quietly. Travis looked at Camille's gray eyes, which still held intelligence and determination despite her obvious pain. The paramedics were working frantically, preparing her for emergency transport, but her condition was critical. "I don't know, sweetheart," he said honestly. Camille reached up with her uninjured hand and touched Sage's face gently. "You look just like your father when he was young," she whispered. "Brave and stubborn and absolutely determined to save everyone around you. Are you going to die?" Sage asked with the directness that only children possessed. Camille looked at Travis, then back at his daughter. "I don't know. But I want you to understand something important. Your father is the best man I've ever known. He risked everything to save me, a stranger, because that's who he is. Promise me you'll remember that." "I promise," Sage said solemnly. As the paramedics loaded Camille onto a stretcher and rushed her toward the waiting helicopter, she caught Travis's hand one final time. "Thank you," she said, "for reminding me who I used to be. Thank you for showing me who I still am," Travis replied. The helicopter lifted off into the dawn sky, carrying Camille toward a hospital and a future that remained uncertain. But for the first time in years, Travis felt like he was exactly where he belonged, standing in a warehouse full of chaos and consequences, his daughter safe beside him, having just participated in something that mattered more than quarterly earnings or monthly bills. He was a protector again. He was a hero in his daughter's eyes. And maybe, if Camille survived her injuries and the legal proceedings that would follow, he might discover that the scared foster kids from Henderson's house had finally found their way home to each other. 18 months later, the morning sun streamed through the windows of a renovated farmhouse in Millbrook Valley, casting golden light across a kitchen table where 3 people sat sharing pancakes and planning their Saturday. The house wasn't large or luxurious by the standards Camille Drovane had once known, but it was filled with the kind of warmth that no amount of money could purchase. Camille, who now went by Cami Torres after a quiet wedding ceremony 6 months earlier, poured coffee into mismatched mugs while Travis helped Sage organize her art supplies for the community center class she taught every weekend. The scene was so thoroughly domestic that visitors often forgot they were looking at a woman who had once commanded a $47 billion empire and a man who had single-handedly taken down an international weapons conspiracy. The bullet had missed Camille's heart by less than 2 inches, requiring 3 surgeries and months of physical therapy to repair the damage. But the injury had been nothing compared to the psychological reconstruction required to transform a ruthless CEO back into the idealistic girl who had once dreamed of changing the world through kindness rather than conquest. "Dad, tell Cammy about the job offer from Washington," Sage said, not looking up from her sketchpad where she was drawing what appeared to be a family of superheroes. Travis grimaced. "It's not that simple, sweetheart." "What job offer?" Camille asked, settling into her chair with the careful movement that still marked her recovery. The Department of Homeland Security wants Travis to head up a new task force investigating corporate espionage with national security implications, Sage announced with the pride of a daughter who understood exactly how impressive her father was. They said his work on the Nexus conspiracy saved thousands of lives. Camille looked at her husband with the mixture of love and exasperation that had become familiar over the past year. "And you haven't mentioned this because?" "Because it would mean moving to Washington, traveling constantly, being away from both of you for weeks at a time." Travis reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "I spent too many years not understanding what actually matters. I'm not making that mistake again." What if there was a way to do the work without sacrificing the family? Travis raised an eyebrow. "What are you thinking?" Camille smiled, the expression transforming her face in ways that reminded him of the 17-year-old girl who had once promised to change the world. "I've been having conversations with some people about starting a non-profit organization. Corporate ethics consulting, whistleblower protection, investigating companies that prioritize profit over human safety." "That sounds like the Cammy I remember from Henderson's house." "It is. But this version has 20 years of business experience and a very personal understanding of what happens when good people stay silent about dangerous systems." Camille pulled out a folder she had been hiding under her placemat. "I've already secured funding from 3 foundations, and Rebecca has agreed to serve on the advisory board." Travis opened the folder and found himself looking at incorporation documents for the Sarah Torres Institute for Corporate Accountability, named after his late wife who had dedicated her life to healing people rather than using them. "You want to name it after Sarah? She was a healer, Travis. She spent her life protecting people who couldn't protect themselves." Camille's voice grew soft. "I never met her, but I know she would have wanted her legacy to be about making the world safer for families like yours." Sage looked up from her drawing. "So Dad could take the government job and you could run the institute, and you'd be working together to catch bad guys?" "Something like that," Camille confirmed. We'd be partners, not just in marriage but in purpose, using everything we've learned to prevent other families from going through what we did. Travis stared at the documents, feeling the familiar surge of purpose that he had first experienced during that desperate rescue operation. But this time, the calling didn't require him to choose between duty and family. It integrated them into something larger and more meaningful than either could achieve alone. The funding, he asked, where did it come from? My severance package from Nexus was rather generous, even after the legal settlements and victim compensation funds. Camille's smile was wry. Turns out that being nearly murdered by your own board of directors creates significant leverage in employment negotiations. And Rebecca's okay with this? Rebecca thinks it's the best idea I've had since learning to code. She's transformed Nexus into exactly the kind of company our father dreamed of building: ethical, innovative, focused on solving problems rather than creating them. Camille reached across the table and took both Travis and Sage's hands. But, more importantly, she's proud that I finally figured out the difference between being successful and being significant. The kitchen fell silent except for the ticking of the antique clock Travis had inherited from his grandmother. Outside, they could hear the sounds of their neighbors beginning their own Saturday routines: lawn mowers starting, children playing, dogs barking at delivery trucks. It was the symphony of ordinary life, the kind of peace that both Travis and Camille had thought was reserved for other people. "There's something else," Camille said, her voice taking on the careful tone she used when broaching sensitive subjects. "The Institute would need a headquarters somewhere central but away from Washington politics. I was thinking about the old Henderson foster home." Travis felt his breath catch. "It's still standing?" "Barely. But it's for sale. And it sits on 12 acres that would be perfect for a training center, conference facilities, housing for protected witnesses." Camille's eyes held the same determined gleam that had once conquered corporate boardrooms. "I want to turn the place where we learn to survive into a place where other people learn to fight back." Sage looked up from her drawing again. "You mean we'd live where you and Dad met? If your father agrees. And if you think you could handle being the daughter of two people who spend their time making powerful enemies." Sage grinned, the fearless expression of a girl who had already been kidnapped by international conspirators and lived to tell about it. "Mom always said I was born to be part of something bigger than myself. I think this counts." Travis looked around the kitchen table at his daughter and his wife, two people who had taught him that courage came in many forms. Sometimes it meant rappelling down cliffs to save strangers, but more often it meant choosing love over fear, purpose over profit, and family over everything else the world claimed was important. "When do we start?" he asked. 3 hours later, they stood in the overgrown yard of the Henderson foster home, watching Sage explore the playground, where her parents had once shared dreams that seemed impossible for kids who started with nothing. The house was in worse condition than Camille had described: roof damage, broken windows, weeds growing through the foundation, but the bones were solid. "It'll take months of renovation," Travis observed. "Good thing I know someone with construction management experience," Camille replied, nudging him with her elbow. "And someone with more money than sense, that too." Sage came running back from the old swing set, her face bright with discovery. "There's something carved in the oak tree by the back fence. Come look." They followed her to a massive tree that had probably been ancient when the house was first built. Carved into the bark, weathered but still legible, were two sets of initials inside a heart: TD plus CC forever. Travis stared at the carving, memory flooding back. "You made me do that the night before we aged out of the system. Sod you wanted. Proof that someone had cared about you in this place." "I remember." Camille traced the letters with her finger. "I was so scared that we'd lose each other, that you'd forget about the foster girl who had too many opinions and not enough social skills. I never forgot. I just didn't know how to find my way back to you. Maybe we weren't ready then." Maybe we needed to become who we were supposed to be before we could build something real together. Sage was already pulling out her sketchpad, drawing the tree with its carved promise. I'm going to make this the logo for the Institute. A tree, with strong roots and initials that prove love can last forever. As the afternoon sun slanted through the leaves of the old oak tree, casting patterns of light and shadow across the yard where they would build their new life, Travis realized that some stories don't have endings, they have transformations. The scared boy and determined girl who had once carved their initials into this tree had become the man and woman standing here now, ready to turn their own survival into a lifeline for others. The Sarah Torres Institute for Corporate Accountability would open its doors 18 months later, occupying a fully restored Henderson house that had been transformed into something unprecedented, place where corporate whistleblowers could find protection, where families torn apart by systemic corruption could find justice, and where two former foster kids could prove that the most powerful revenge against a broken system was building something better. Travis's work with the Department of Homeland Security would eventually lead to the prosecution of 17 different corporate conspiracies, saving an estimated 43,000 lives and preventing billions of dollars in fraud. Camille's Institute would become the gold standard for corporate accountability, providing the legal framework and protection services that made it possible for ordinary employees to speak truth to power without destroying their own lives. But their greatest achievement wasn't measured in lives saved or criminals prosecuted. It was measured in smaller, more personal victories. Sage growing up with the unshakable knowledge that her parents were heroes, not because of what they had accomplished, but because of who they chose to be every single day. Travis rediscovering that his military training and protective instincts were gifts meant to be shared with the world, not burdens that isolated him from the people he loved. Camille learning that true power came not from commanding others, but from empowering them to command themselves. On quiet Sunday evenings, when the work was done and the world's crises could wait until Monday, they would sit together on the porch of the restored Henderson house and watch Sage play in the yard where their love story had begun. Sometimes Sage would ask them to tell the story again, how Daddy saved Mommy from the bad men, how Mommy gave up everything to protect their family, how sometimes the most important battles are fought not for conquest, but for love. For love. And every time they told it, Travis and Camille discovered something new in their own story, some detail or moment that reminded them why they had fought so hard to find their way back to each other. They had started as children who had nothing, survived as adults who thought they had everything, and found peace as partners who finally understood that the only wealth worth accumulating was the kind you shared with people who would miss you when you were gone. Their initials were still carved in the oak tree, weathered but permanent, a promise kept across 2 decades and countless obstacles. But now there was a new carving beside the old one, added by Sage on her 13th birthday, the Torres family forever and always. Because some love stories don't end with happily ever after. They end with happily ever onward, carrying their light into a world that desperately needs to remember what real heroes look like. The morning mist clung to the hills surrounding the Henderson Institute, as locals had come to call it, while Travis Torres stood at the kitchen window of the restored foster home, watching his wife tend to the memorial garden she had planted in honor of the victims of corporate corruption. At 43, Camille moved with the confident grace of someone who had found her true calling, her hands gentle as she arranged fresh flowers around the stone markers that bore the names of people whose stories had driven them both to this. Worked out the house behind him buzzed with quiet activity. 3 families currently lived in the Institute's residential program, corporate whistleblowers, whose courage had cost them their jobs, their safety, and sometimes their freedom. The Sarah Torres Institute had grown beyond anything they had imagined when they first carved their initials in that oak tree, now employing 47 people and operating satellite offices in 6 states. But success, Travis had learned, wasn't measured in budget allocations or case statistics. It was measured in moments like this morning, when Maria Santos had called from Sacramento to report that the pharmaceutical executive they had helped her expose was finally facing federal charges for covering up dangerous side effects. It was measured in letters from families who no longer lived in fear because someone had found the courage to speak truth to power. Sage appeared in the kitchen doorway, 17 now and taller than her stepmother, carrying a portfolio that contained her early admission acceptance to MIT. She had inherited her mother's artistic eye and her father's protective instincts, channeling both into a passion for designing systems that made it impossible for corporations to hide their wrongdoing from the people they affected. "Dad, the morning briefing starts in 10 minutes, she reminded him, settling into her chair at the kitchen table that had become command central for their family and their mission. "Where's your mother?" Travis asked, though he could see Camille through the window, now standing beside the newest addition to the memorial garden, a simple stone bench dedicated to Patterson, who had died peacefully in his sleep 2 years earlier, surrounded by the family he had chosen at the Institute. Talking to Rebecca on the West Coast. Something about expanding the international program. Sage poured herself coffee with the practiced ease of someone who had grown up around adult conversations about justice and corruption. She wants to establish partnerships with whistleblower organizations in 12 different countries. Travis smiled, recognizing the ambitious scope that had once built Nexus Dynamics, now focused on tearing down the systems that protected corporate criminality. Camille's transformation had been complete, but her fundamental drive to change the world had never diminished. It had simply found a worthier target. The briefing room filled gradually with their team, former federal investigators, reformed corporate lawyers, journalists who specialized in exposing systematic corruption, and protection specialists like Mickey Torres, who had joined the Institute permanently after watching too many good people suffer for doing the right thing. Their current caseload included 17 active investigations, ranging from pharmaceutical companies hiding clinical trial data to defense contractors selling defective equipment to the military. Each case represented families who had trusted Travis and Camille with their most precious assets, their safety, their future, and their faith that justice was still possible in a world designed to protect the powerful. Update on the Meridian chemical situation, Mickey reported, his voice carrying the satisfaction of someone who enjoyed watching bullies get their comeuppance. The EPA finally raided their headquarters yesterday. Seized computers, documents, everything we told them to look for. "And the families in Riverside County?" Camille asked, taking her seat beside Travis. "Medical monitoring program starts next week. Full coverage for anyone who lived within 10 miles of their facility during the contamination period." Mickey's expression grew serious. "We're looking at potentially 3,000 people who were exposed to carcinogens because Meridian decided environmental compliance was too expensive." Travis felt the familiar surge of purpose that had driven him since that night when he had pulled Camille from the wreckage of her Mercedes. Every case was personal now. Every victory a reminder that individual courage could still make corporations accountable for their choices. After the briefing ended, and their team dispersed to pursue justice in conference rooms and courthouses across the country, Travis and Camille walked together through the Institute's grounds. The old playground where they had once shared teenage dreams was now a training facility where protection specialists learned to keep witnesses safe. The barn where Travis had hidden as a scared 8-year-old foster kid was now a secure communications center where encrypted evidence was transmitted to journalists and prosecutors worldwide. "Any regrets?" Travis asked, the question that had become their private ritual during these quiet moments. About giving up the penthouse and the private jet to live in a renovated foster home. Camille's laugh carried genuine amusement. About trading board meetings for family dinners and corporate Conquests for actually making the world safer for people like Sage? She stopped walking and turned to face him, her gray eyes holding the same intensity that had once commanded boardrooms, now focused entirely on him and the life they had built together. Travis, I spent 20 years accumulating everything I thought would make me matter, and I never felt like I mattered at all. Now I wake up every morning knowing that what we do today might save someone's life tomorrow. If that's not worth trading a billion-dollar empire for, then I never understood what wealth actually meant. Sage appeared on the porch, laptop balanced in one hand while she waved them inside with the other. Conference call with the Senate subcommittee starts in 5 minutes. They want to discuss the corporate accountability legislation. As they walked back toward the house, Travis reflected on the strange mathematics of their lives. They had started with nothing, achieved everything the world told them to want, lost it all in service of something greater, and discovered that having less had somehow made them infinitely richer. The oak tree still stood beside the back fence, its carved promise weathered but permanent. TD plus CC forever. But now it was surrounded by dozens of smaller trees, each one planted by a family whose life had been saved or restored through the work of the Institute. A forest of hope growing from the seeds of two people who had remembered that the most important thing you could build with your life was a bridge for others to cross toward safety. Their story had become part of something larger, a reminder that heroes weren't born in boardrooms or battlefields, but in the quiet moments when ordinary people decided that someone else's well-being mattered more than their own comfort. And in a world that often forgot the difference between success and significance, Travis and Camille Torres continued to prove that the greatest empire anyone could build was one that made other people's dreams possible, the initials carved in. That tree would last long after they were gone, but the institute they had built would last even longer, a permanent testament to the transformative power of love that chooses courage over convenience and purpose over profit. Some stories end, others become legacies, and the very best ones become invitations for others to write their own chapters of hope in a world that desperately needs more heroes, who remember that saving one person can be the beginning of saving everyone. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.